All right, everyone, we are setting up to draw from home for our remote class this Wednesday. You can see I've already started by taping my paper to my board. What I do is I use my tape. My tape's much thinner than yours, right along the edge of the paper to create an even margin, and then I reinforce it at the sides, okay? So I start with the tape to the board, and like we went over online, I have all my tools next to me, which today are gonna be my Vine charcoal, my kneaded eraser, my hard eraser, piece of fabric. I have my compressed charcoal as well. And as always, my measuring stick, which I gave you in class. If you've misplaced it, keep a pencil on hand, okay? Now my setup is straight in front of me. I'm gonna tilt you up and then I'll tilt you back down so we can see my setup's right in front of me. We're gonna duck down, okay. Now, what we're gonna do differently is this time when we draw the boxes, we're gonna focus on value. Now, value is a scale of your light to your dark, from your lightest light to your darkest dark. Now, your lightest light is the white of the paper, okay? And your darkest dark is as black as you can get an image, all right? But to change this up and make it a little easier, we're gonna start by toning our paper. And what I do is I take a piece of Vine charcoal, and I'm gonna work it in circles, right? You see how my hand's making a circular gesture? Now my board is textured, so that texture is gonna show through. Your boards shouldn't be textured, but they might have a little bit, you know. You just kind of play it by ear. This is just for the convenience of a demo. All right, so I've got my Vine charcoal covered. I'm gonna take my chamois, and I'm gonna work it in tiny circles until I get a nice soft gray tone. There we go, that looks good. Then what I'm gonna do is we're always gonna start with our rule of threes. So I'm going to make 1, 2, 1, and you see how I hold my tool pinched between my fingers like this, right? And then I just drag it and I move my whole arm, right? So these are my points of interest. Now, the interesting thing when you are working with tone paper is that you can draw your shapes when we start mapping or laying in our shapes, right? Either by doing, remember, it's our basic shapes. I can use my tool that is my Vine charcoal and work additively, which means I am adding media to the paper, or I can use my eraser and work reductively, which means I am removing from the paper, right? And if you want to get it nice and specific and like nice and clean, I kind of work it into a wedge shape. I'm going to use it to carve out my space, right? So I'd like you to work with both of these methods. I'm going to start entirely reductively because we've all gotten a little bit of experience working not that way, okay? We've all worked additively in class. You can also use your hard eraser. You can see mine's really worn on one edge, but I've got these great squared edges on the back. So I can actually draw using my eraser, right? See, and the whole time I want to make sure that you're still comparatively measuring these shapes, right? Because right now, if I put my stick here, the bottom edge of this shape matches up with that corner. But, and I wonder if I can show you, if I look at it, that's at much more of an angle, right? You see what I'm talking about is how this corner does not match up with that. But in my drawing, it does, okay? So already I know that this, I'm gonna change this shape. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna gray it out a little bit more. I'm gonna make sure I get this edge accurate, this angle. Okay. And then I know that this edge meets at about that one. So I can draw a little line over. There we go. This is hitting a little awkwardly at the edge, right? And I don't like that compositionally because we've talked about how it'll go off the page. So I'm gonna work again quickly, but because I've done it once, I'm sure I'll be a little bit faster this time. So I want that edge here, here. See, I'm using how my kneaded eraser to draw lines this time. And then I'm gonna use it to carve out kind of this shape of my taller box. Now, when we draw additively, we're relying a lot on outlines. Okay, I'm gonna show you the difference. I'm gonna outline box number 1, and I'm going to create edges for box number 2. Actually, vice versa. We're gonna outline this box. We're gonna create edges for this one. This has more distinct edges. So, if I wanted to outline a box, right? That's an outline. It's got clear, defined edges like that. But if I wanted to create a shape using only edges, okay, what I would do is I would use my tools to create kind of a clean edge. Right? So what I'm talking about here is how right here, all right, right here is as much of a line as right here, but instead of using an outline, I'm creating an edge. All right, you can do that within the shape too, okay? And as I'm working, I'm really seeing how off my mapping is because I'm measuring the whole time, all right? I have other tools that I'm using to measure and things like that. So, going to bring that up. There's a shadow here. These are going to be parallel. Drawing through the shape, right? Fighting the urge to do kind of that gesture, drawing through the shape. There's a shadow here, and we're going to talk about things being comparative as far as shading, okay? So that means when I'm looking at my object, I'm asking myself, is this object darker or lighter than this object? Is it darker or lighter than the ground it sits on, okay? So there's a shadow there. And it's darker than this, but it's lighter than that. So I need to be careful to not lose that edge. See, I almost had some open box lid syndrome over there. Now this side is also a little bit darker. So you see the difference when I'm working on toned paper is normally at this point, we're still outlining. But because my paper is already partially toned, it's letting me shade a lot faster, okay? Because of that, I'm gonna also start mapping in my shadows. All right. Because of that, it seems like my drawing comes together faster. And it kind of, I mean, I personally think it does. Everyone kind of has their own thing. Now, I drew a really hard outline there, right? Some of us have talked about how do we get rid of outlines. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring this shadow up into that shape a little bit, right? I brought it up into that shape about 1/2 inch. I'm using my hands, my fabric's right here. You guys can use your fabric, otherwise you're gonna make a mess, all right? So, what I wanna do to bring that hard edge back in is I'm gonna take my eraser. I'm gonna make it really crispy edge, okay? See that? Now, when you work this way, you're gonna pull in your compressed charcoal once you get to a point where you're working things up, because what you're gonna start doing is deciding what's gonna be my darkest dark space, okay? And I can just kind of shimmy in my background here quickly, all right? So I'm gonna decide my darkest dark is gonna be in here. Now, the way that compressed works is, again, remember, it's very hard to erase this, okay? So I'm gonna use it by working in tiny circles in my darkest area. And then I'm gonna take my vine charcoal and I'm gonna work over it, again, in tiny circles. Because what's gonna happen is my vine charcoal is gonna help me blend it out like a bit of a gradient, okay? That means where it's darker in one section and it changes. Can also use the side of my finger. But some of us talked about shading anomalies today, and that's where you get little marks in your paper and things like that, and how to avoid them. I recommend the best way to get smooth shading is to work with the edge of your finger, to work with your chamois, right? My chamois is gonna pull up a little bit of my charcoal as I go. And to work with your vine charcoal. So you see how my drawing, like I said, is coming together so much faster than when we're just working with outlines. Working with outlines is really good when you're learning to start sighting, right? And you're just working on drawing proportions. But you've all successfully drawn proportions for 2 days now. So it's time to kind of try to find a different way of working with it. Now, this is something that happened a lot in class, both days, right? You see how my edge right there doesn't actually kind of match up with my corners? It's a little bit to the right. What I'm gonna do is, because this one's lighter than that, is I'm gonna use my eraser to pull that line back in. Because as we work, we have a tendency to kind of let things get loose and squishy. You may have heard me call them kind of looking like Jello or Play-Doh. We really want our boxes to stay structured, okay? And what you can start doing is also differentiating, right? Like, because right now the only thing that separates these two shapes is this line. So I have to look really carefully and find out what shape is a pinch darker. And now I've established my darkest darks. What I want to do is I also want to start establishing my highlights, my lightest light areas. And that's where the light is really hitting parts of my drawing. I feel like that's here. Has a really strong light source. And you see how I'm really pushing with my eraser? I'm chiseling off the value. There's small highlights on this box. So I'm going to start kind of marking those in. Okay, that's me trying to find my lightest lights. All right. Let's see, what do I have going on up here? Because right now this box is pretty worked up. This one needs a little bit of help, okay? So we're going to start by kind of doing a little bit of shading up in that corner and just blending it out. I can use my chamois. Hear my table squeaking. All right, I'm gonna take my compressed back. I'm gonna start establishing some more of my darkest darks for my background. Again, I'm gonna go over my compressed with my vine charcoal. Gonna work in tiny circles. See how that edge is getting a little bit soft? I'm gonna take my vine charcoal. I'm gonna really try to reestablish it so that it doesn't get soft and squishy and faded. See how much charcoal powder, oh, I'm sorry. There's a lot of charcoal powder that comes off of this, so I really am gonna clean my table afterwards too, okay? Now I'm starting to lose that box a little bit again. So what I'm gonna do is take my eraser, forming a wedge. I'm just kind of using it like a tool to make things sort of happen. I can make textural marks with it, okay? So when we're working with value, you're gonna find that there's a very clear way to make sure that you've succeeded at value. When I grade you, I am looking for 5 shades, okay? I want your darkest dark, your lightest light, a middle gray, and then shades in between, okay? So something between mid-gray and black, something between mid-gray and white, okay? Let's see where my eraser went. So right now I'm pretty close to that. I'm just trying to make sure I've got my highlights where I need them to be. I'm making sure that I pull some of my shadows back out and some of my highlights back out, because you can see my handprints from where I'm resting. I'm gonna do some small details, like put a really dark edge underneath this box to show the weight of it. And then I'm gonna blend it out by working in tiny circles, okay? So that's kind of roughly it, all right? I just wanted to give you an idea of how we're gonna be working with value, okay? Instead of line, we're focusing on value this week. You can see my still life is almost identical to what it was previously, right? For like our last handout version, I just changed up the boxes a little bit. But what it is I also have some pretty dynamic lighting, which gets me this cool shadow down here. That helps. I actually have 3 different lights on in my house. So try a couple of things. But I do want you to try to really find your darkest darks and your lightest lights. Remember, your lightest light's easy. It's erasing back to the white of the paper. Your darkest dark, it's as dark as you can go with this compressed charcoal, okay? And do real comparative, okay? Is this shape darker or lighter than this shape? Is the shadow darker or lighter than the shape next to it, right? That's what I mean by comparative. And as I'm comparing everything, I work my entire drawing up at the same time, okay? I'm never finishing one box and moving on to the next. Everything gets finished together. All right? Well, I think that's it. Keep an eye out for the handout. I look forward to us working on this on Wednesday.